Well, good morning, everybody. On Monday afternoon, I found myself kind of rethinking a few things about this near-term pattern and what it might mean for the end of December and then the start of the new year. And a lot of that thinking started in Europe. And what I'm looking at here is a map. This was back on December the 3rd. It was a relatively cloud-free day to show me what the Alps look like. And as we talked about last week, we knew there was quite a bit of snow that was expected across the Alps. But as you look at it here, you can see pretty impressive snow cover. We even have more snow coming in the near term. There's more snow for Germany, more snow for other parts of Eastern Europe, and then much of Russia over the next 10 days is just locked into a really, really cold pattern. Now, when you look at these maps projected like this, it doesn't really show the kind of the hemispheric distribution of the temperatures. And what I mean by that is, for now into the foreseeable future, we're going to lock quite a bit of colder air onto this side of the northern hemisphere. And what you notice is a lot of that is in Russia, while much of the Arctic is a bit warm compared to historical averages. I then notice this. We have some colder air that comes into Alaska, some colder air that is over the top of Greenland. I'm talking about colder compared to average. And what we tend to see is when most of the cold air is on the other side of the hemisphere from northern hemisphere, so over here, from North America over here. And then we have cooler air than average over Greenland and Alaska. It's going to be hard to really drag a lot of Arctic air through North America, but it has me just wondering, as we see this pattern evolving in this way, does this at some point redistribute itself across the Northern Hemisphere? And when does that happen? What kicks this over the top or around to deliver it back to the US, to Canada, and when does that happen? Because right now, to see that much cold air focused on one spot here, there's going to have to be a movement of this at some point. And it could be, a pretty big shock to the overall flow pattern to the Northern Hemisphere. So we're going to have to watch that. That's going to be just something I want to kind of keep my fingers on the pulse of. Now, I do believe that this is also connected with the stratospheric polar vortex. Now, remember, we have two polar vortexes, if you will. There's one on the troposphere. Those are the deeper troughs that kind of lobe their way around the Northern Hemisphere. And then you also have the stratospheric polar vortex. And what we watch for all winter long is when the stratospheric polar vortex, shown to you here in the blue, kind of lines up with the tropospheric polar vortex. One amplifies the other. And what you notice here in the forecast as I play it forward is we just kind of see a pretty consistent picture. There is some stratospheric ridging here, and it's displaced the polar vortex to this side of the Northern Hemisphere. A lot of it's Europe and Russia. Okay, some of it's in the North Atlantic as well. And it seems to want to stay there for a while. So can we call this, a disrupted or perturbed or displaced polar vortex? Sure. I mean, clearly there's some ridging in the stratosphere here that's kind of pushed it off. Because if everything looked, quote unquote normal, it'd be sitting right over the Arctic, and that, this would be the area around which it would sit. So it is displaced, and which means we could be walking into a season where we have to talk more about the polar vortex and its net position and its alignment with the tropospheric vortex once we get later into winter. But until then, I just think we're going to have this temperature distribution. Cooler, cold, and therefore a lack of Arctic air connection in North America. That's it. That's going to be one of the bigger stories. Now, next, I want to show you something that's kind of a fun animation. So you're not going to see much. You kind of see this line right here. That's actually the farthest most extent of the sun's light right now. So if you're in northern Alaska, that's what you see here. Sun's already set for winter. It's not coming up for a long time. This line's going to continue to shrink farther and farther to the south as we approach the solstice. But what I wanted you to see here is this huge low that's tucked up into the Gulf of Alaska. And I want to talk about that low because when we think about North American weather patterns, Aleutian lows or lows that move into the Gulf of Alaska, those are critical to determining the trough ridge pattern across the United States. And if you want a really active winter, you've got to get these things, these deep lows, they need to be over British Columbia or Washington or Oregon. They've got to live there. The deep ones need to live there. And what that does is that sets up the whole of the U.S. for southwest jet stream flow. And southwest jet stream flow is the best, okay? And when I say the best, it really probably means the worst for everybody else. It just brings system after system after system. It unlocks the Gulf of Mexico. It just brings in a lot of tumultuous weather. Now, the tail end of that, yesterday, here it is. So this is the tail end of the front that's kind of wrapping itself into that low that's pretty far up here in the Gulf of Alaska. continues to lash the Pacific Northwest and did so all day yesterday, and it's going to continue to do that throughout the day today. There's a lot of momentum in this. There's a lot of moisture in this, and it's already added up a lot of precip. This is just the last 72 hours through 5 a.m. this morning, and you can see that we have some places in coastal Washington and Oregon that have added, just in the last 72 hours, another 4 to 8 plus inches of total accumulated precipitation. Now, the difference is, because that low is so far into the Gulf of Alaska, there's not been a lot of really cold air, which means we've moved the snow line up a bit higher here. All right. In addition to that, we did have a weak little clipper that's spinning over parts of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan early this morning. We'll take a look at that in a few seconds. It's going to move off to the east. But there's a lot of questions about the next system that's about to roll through here late this week, and we're going to get to that in a few moments as well. I did want to point out, we talked about this yesterday, but just another look at some of the really, really heavy rains we had along the Gulf Coast here too. Okay, so this is what I'm keeping an eye on. So here is that deeper low. Now this is the upper level winds, so that low is sitting underneath this. I want to be watching this piece of the jet stream right here. Now we're going to watch out ahead of it just the constant flow coming in, and that's going to continue to hit the northwest, for the next several days. But this right here, in the forecast models, this trough, actually it's not really even a trough. The trough is down here. This little speed max, this little jet streak, it is expected to get into the Midwest, come over the mountains, dive south, get into the Midwest. And it's the piece that's going to set up the big system we're watching later this week. So I want to show it to you. This is what I'm keeping an eye on. So this is upper level vorticity. And I'm telling you, we're so close to getting a system roll up the East Coast. It's just every single time these troughs get kicked out. And if you could build in a little high pressure here, a big ridge over Greenland, instead of it just jumping out, it would make a hard turn and go right up the East Coast. But instead, we keep kicking them out. So that's why I'm not talking too much about the East Coast this morning. But what I am going to focus on is by Thursday, let's see here, getting into Friday right here. Remember how we talked about 2 waves yesterday? Your lead wave goes north. It's a bit farther south than we talked about yesterday. So we'll take a look at where that new snow track is going to be. But this right here, okay, this is the short wave that I showed you was here today. And as we watch that piece come in, what is expected to do is it's going to link itself up with this elongated pressure trough that curls up around the low that's moving over the Hudson Bay. And this is a relatively deep trough, and it's even got a little bit of a positive tilt on it at start, and it's going to quickly pull into a negative tilt. That's where it goes like this. Now, we love these. They dig and then wrap up and occlude. And why I like that is because that's going to help swing this system out of the plains through the Midwest, straight into the Great Lakes. And that right there is the next system we're watching on. Now, here's the problem. We don't know exactly when, and exactly where the low is going to be, because the only sampling we're getting right now of this is satellite derived, and it's based off model initialization. So we're curious, does this really have the momentum in it, the speed in it we think it does? And does it follow this to eventually get over the mountains and become this system we're all waiting and anticipating seeing? Now, that's a big setup to tell you what's going to happen. So let's get into this. First, I want to show you where we are currently on snow, because we're talking about this next system being a snowmaker for a place that's not seen a whole lot of it. I'm talking about this section of the country. But this is the season-to-date snowfall map. This begins on September 30th, and what we've got here is the Cascades really just added up some great new snow lately. It's not getting it today, but it'll get more soon. Rockies are looking good. Okay, overall we've got snow. This was from that big event back in October, and we've had some snow. We had the 4 to 8 inch event that came through here, some heavy snows in Nebraska, and we had our big lake effect event. But I always love to look at this in comparison to normal. So this is the percent of normal snowfall through December the 4th. So it's not through the end of the season, it's through December the 4th. And you really start to identify, places that have had a few big events and those that are still waiting. So I love looking at these maps. So what are we waiting on? Well, this morning, here's a little clipper that rolled through last night, bringing in some light rain and some snow farther to the north. It's right now early this morning, sitting almost just south of Chicago, right in through here. We then watch the flow coming into the Pacific Northwest, strong onshore flow. This is just going to continue all day long and occupy a bigger and bigger area in the Northwest. This is why we've got flood watches that extend from northern California all the way up to, the Puget Sound. Also here, Spokane, getting over toward Coeur d'Alene, strong winds in Montana, fog in California, fog in North Dakota, fog in parts of the Mid-South here. And we do see a chance for getting some snow in the Appalachian Mountains as well as this system rolls through. So let's pick it up with the high-res NAM and go through the middle of this morning, Getting into this afternoon and this evening, there's your snow in the Appalachian Mountains, some scattered showers, some snow showers north of that. But I mean, the show is here. Just watch this flow come into the northwest. Just nonstop through the overnight hours, through early Wednesday morning. We finally get enough colder air to bring in some snow to the Cascades, snow to the Northern Rockies, and that front just continues to dive in. Now, by the end of the high-res NAM run, all right, we see the lead wave kicking out into parts of northern U.S., southern Canada. There's some risk of some freezing rain here, and there's the snow on the backside. But it's the second wave, the one you don't even see yet, that kicks out here and then comes across the Midwest we have to talk about next. So what's the newest WPC outlook? Well, this is the new forecast released this morning. It has really increased the rainfall in parts of the eastern Corn Belt, the Ohio River Valley, and up the East Coast all the way down to the south as well. We have this same corridor still showing up drier over the next 7 days. Also, this whole side of Texas and Oklahoma. And as we talked so much about, no good subtropical flow coming into California just yet to relieve the longer, drier start to this new, what we call wet season for the West. So those things haven't changed, but the thing that has is the position and strength of this low. So all of that is to get you to here. Sorry, that was kind of a ridiculous buildup, but I wanted to get you to this point. This is where the models are doing. They've changed positions, okay? So this is through tomorrow. We've already seen this with the high-res NAM. There's that deep low that's offshore because there's no good high pressure north to pull it back in. And as we watch here going from Thursday into Friday, lead wave comes out of Montana. You can see it will be producing some light snow, maybe some rain in southeastern Montana. I'm looking over here, sorry. And then what we've got is snow spreading into North Dakota in the European model because this low is now farther to the south, whereas the GFS keeps it a little bit farther north, and therefore the snow stays in Manitoba. So look at the difference just already here. Now, the second thing changes when the low curls up over the Hudson Bay and the next shortwave sneaks out of the Colorado Rockies. Now, if you remember yesterday, I was telling you, the European was slower, the GFS was faster. So all the snow in the GFS was way over here, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Ontario, and the European was putting all the snow right here. Well, look what it's doing now. This, again, is Saturday morning, Saturday midday, Saturday evening. Now the GFS has repositioned its snow back to Missouri, Iowa, maybe a part of northern Illinois and Wisconsin. And the European model is actually a bit further in east, I should say, and still waiting to kind of open up the low, not until we get into Sunday. Now, what's interesting is that further east position is changing where the heavy snow is. Now it's got it here for kind of eastern Illinois, western Indiana, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, and sneaking up here into like the UP and wrapping itself around into into Ontario. And then the GFS just takes off with this system and it goes. And by the way, that's not to ignore. Let me bring you back here. This is another big system in the Northwest, maybe a big snowmaker for the Northern Rockies as well, and more rain for for this part of the Pacific Northwest. So you ready for this? Let's just watch it again. This is 12 a.m. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. Saturday morning, 12 p.m. Saturday Central Time. This is 6 p.m. This is now 12 a.m. Sunday morning, 6 a.m. Sunday morning, 12 p.m., and let's get out there to 6 p.m. on Sunday. Now, as we continue with this forecast going into Sunday night, Monday morning, it curls up, according to the European, to a deep low that hits Ontario hard, hits the Great Lakes pretty hard here, and then that system's out. Now, the European model wants to toss another low late down here. With all the cold air behind this, it wants to put another system in here. It's kind of in the GFS as well. But you look here and you see just a positional change, an intensity change. We need to have a look at what all that means. Let's blow this up and have a look. So we're playing for the European model forecast. We're going to take this out 1 week to look at both of these systems, I should say. So there's our strong onshore flow. There's the clipper that heads out ahead of it, and then the deeper trough that exits. You can now see where it's got the heaviest precipitation, here in east. Now compare that to the GFS. Let's quickly get it out there to 1 week. All right, so there's the model differences. European, GFS, and a map that compares the two. So look how wetter the GFS is here. In fact, I should say snowier the GFS is here. And then the European is wetter everywhere right ahead of it. European's wetter in the northern plains of Montana, but the GFS is wetter right along the west coast. So just interesting model differences here, only out a week. On the snowy side of it, this is what the new European solution suggests. So you can see the heaviest snow bands right in through here. Here's that system that's out ahead of it that goes up toward the Hudson Bay. So it's bringing in this snow here to North Dakota out of Montana. And the European did increase the late week snowfall totals for, the Cascades here and the Rockies. So what did the GFS do? This is what the GFS did. So it's a completely different pattern. Look at that. That's just amazing to see. So the GFS has got this stripe right in here is the heaviest snow. Look how much farther to the north it is here with the next system. And then it's got big snows in the Rockies and Cascades. So finding these model differences is kind of fun to look at here. Okay, probability-wise, this is who's dry. So this is the next 10 days who misses out on this action. We just don't have the strong subtropical flow coming into the southwest. And when you have flow that comes over the mountains and doesn't invigorate a low until you get far enough east, all of this just gets convergence in the upper levels of the atmosphere and it's drier. We talk a lot about that in every video. Who's on the wetter side of things? This is the probability of getting an inch of liquid equivalent. So some of this will be snow, of course, but an inch of liquid equivalent through the next 10 days. Here's 2 inches, just so we can kind of identify these really wet regions, and 4 inches is primarily kept up here. We do need to talk about the winter side of this, the snowier side of this. So let's look at probabilities here of getting, how about 3 inches of snow. So this is the latest from the European ensemble on where the snow is going to be. And you can see the 2 kind of main areas here. So it's just remember those individual model runs, which want to put down a foot in certain places, it's not in the ensembles. So this is the European ensemble. Might as well just go look at the GFS. And that's what it's got. So it's much, much more honed in here on the snow in the GFS ensemble. Really kind of fun to see these model differences. All right, where do we go after that? I don't like this. I mentioned earlier, I don't want an Aleutian low. I want these troughs to be on the West Coast. And I want that because that would bring in better precipitation to California, which needs it. Even though they're drought-free, we need it. And then this would set things to come over the top of the Rocky Mountains here and set up these, what we call lee cyclogenesis, these, lee troughing, and would just send lows across the country. Instead, what do we have? The trough is here, the flow goes over the top of it, and I bet you all know what I'm going to say next, convergence. And what that ends up doing is it gives us a week 2 pattern that, looks drier. Now, some of the models are trying to kick off about day 10, a system down in the southern plains. It's actually in all 3 forecast simulations. But I'm telling you, this isn't the right setup. I mean, to have overall flow coming in like that, it's just not the best way to get a deep, big winter cyclone out of this. So that's your week 2 forecast. Temperature-wise, we're on a bit of a wild ride this week. Look at Montana today, 60s possible. That's 30 degrees warmer than normal. And we see that spreading into the plains tomorrow. I'm heading up to Sioux Falls tomorrow, so I'm going to bring the warmth with me, and it's going to be around for Wednesday into Thursday. I mean, very, very mild conditions. I'm not even bringing a coat. I mean, who gets to say that? I'm going to Sioux Falls in December, and I'm not bringing a coat. But this is what Friday looks like. The heat pushes to the east. The west cools down by Saturday, and this is when that low is rolling through. So we've got the temperature pattern that's right to see some snow in this area. So that takes you out there about a week in the temperature forecast. But did you notice there's no deep draw on real Arctic air? I mean, it's just not there. Coolest places in the south, in the 50s and low 60s. That's also where we're concerned about another frost. So this gray just shows us where we have frost risk over the next 7 days. So Central Valley of California again, pretty far to the south here. I just want to show you your overnight low temperatures compared to normal. So Wednesday into Thursday, that's a pretty cold one there. Early Thursday morning, getting the frost risk back into the southeast. Again on Friday morning. So I mean, just think about it. Northern Florida's temperatures in the upper 30s, all right? Minneapolis in the upper 30s. That's how dynamic the temperature pattern is establishing itself around this setup for the low that's coming in this weekend. Overall, though, I'm going to give you that northern hemisphere view of things. So just watch as I play through the next 10 days. Where is the Arctic air? Okay, it just stays here over Russia. With cooler conditions on this side of Greenland and on this side of Alaska, we cannot. We have to have ridges here of heat pushing into Alaska and Greenland to bring in cold, to displace it from there to here. And we just don't see that through the middle of December and then, approaching that full 3rd week of December. It's just not there. So the cooler air that we get to the south, that's all complements of the subtropical jet stream. That's what we've got going on here. All right, I'm going to skip that. I want to get here. When we look out again at the newer, longer range forecast, this is the culprit. This is the thing I want to see move. What you're looking at here is shaded pressure anomalies. And there's just low pressure all throughout this area. Now, to bring in Arctic air, you got to displace low pressure with big Arctic highs. And I need to see things shifting around in Alaska and Greenland in order for that to occur. So my point behind telling you that is if I zoom into the United States and once again show you that 30-day outlook on precipitation, it's the wrong setup just to deliver constant flow to the west. It's the wrong setup to be bringing multiple big systems through the midsection of the country or hitting this Ohio River Valley into the mid-south area. Does the southern part of the United States stay wet? Probably because of the subtropical jet, but that's all spurred on by, the evolution of this El Nino. So we were asking ourselves some questions yesterday. My colleagues Andrew Pritchard and Matt Reardon, has this El Nino maybe gone after its peak already? Because this animation you're watching, which goes through yesterday, shows the water temperatures in here not really changing too much, going back all the way to September. You can see a little bit of warmth coming in here at times, but this is not what we would call a rapidly strengthening El Nino going into December. So thinking about that, there are a couple things I want to take note of. We're going to get into a Nino-like pattern. See how the MJO is going to stack up its best rising motion here over phase 7, 8, and 1. That's very El Nino-like with suppression over Indonesia and Australia. That's also something to look out for here, the westerly wind bursts that are expected to come back on late in the month of December. So that's another signal. And, we think about all of that and say, well, is there any warm water still left to upwell? So this is the top of the Pacific Ocean from South America, to Indonesia. And there's still warm water here that's yet to be replaced with normal or cooler than normal conditions. So it's not as though it's done. We're going to be talking about El Nino and its influence for probably another 4 months. But has it gotten to the top? So I was looking at this. This is the ocean temperatures right smack dab in the equatorial Pacific. And, since September, we've been bumbling along between 1 and 1.5 degrees. We bumped up briefly in late November, but it's right here at 1.5 degrees C above average. And remember, we could say that that's a half to 3/4 of a degree cooler than what was expected. So given all of that, I'm going to rehash just something we talked about last week, and it is, all right, if El Nino years in the past are good representations of maybe what to expect this December, this is what you get. I picked out every El Nino since 1960, and we tended to be a bit drier west. We tend to be very wet across the south. There tend to be decent activity in the Midwest, but this isn't really that strong of a composite anomaly. Tend to be more mild north. Remember, not a connection to cold air, and it tend to be cooler in the southwest. Now, as I've mentioned multiple times, we often get what we call back half loaded winters, especially with El Ninos. And this is what January through March tended to look like when we had those same El Nino years. So much more active in the plains, wet in the south, drier here on this side of the Appalachian Mountains, but that's about the only spot. Look at the West Coast. Really starting to see an increase toward the wetter. And then cold. Got a lot more colder air that tends to come in. Do we stay really mild around the Great Lakes? Well, history would say that a few of these years did, but I think we have a better chance at having a pretty rough go of it the second half of winter. So starting, some point in January, but going through February and March. So we've got that to look forward to, I guess. Last couple things I want to mention here is back to South America. The model battle continues. This is the 15-day outlook from the ECMWF. And it's got the same story. It's trended a little drier in this part of Minas Gerais, and then a little bit farther north here in Tocantins and north of Mato Grosso. So this is the state of Para, and we're not doing a whole lot of ag compared to other places. There's a lot of ag here, but not compared to the southern parts. We're still wet south, wet in Argentina, and look at the GFS. I mean, what a contrast continues here. Very dry across more of Mato Grosso over toward Rondonia, and wetter in the same spots, I think, overall that the European is. I think the European's a little more generous in Argentina, but overall that model battle just continues. And I don't see any real change in that for a while. All of this is despite the one thing in the tropics you have to keep an eye on, and that is that the MJO is sliding around out of phase 4 and 5 over by Australia and is expected to return to a typical El Nino position on the colder side for North America. But because we can't really draw that cold air away from Russia, this move over here may be something that we have to wait several more weeks in order to get a reflection of this with our temperature pattern. So it's going to be a fun week forecasting. There's a lot of, sometimes I say it like moving pieces. Yeah, we've got them now. And I think the big one's going to be what happens to all this cold air. So let's keep watching it together. We'll talk again tomorrow. Thanks.